Hi guys, how are you all today morning? Good morning. Today is 24th December 2023. My name is TSV Raghavan and I live in Chennai, Tamil Nadu, India. This is my spiritual vlog on YouTube. HARDAN, 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 Haribol, TRSV, Nectar, NECTAR, Nectar. In this particular vlog, in all my previous videos, we have been trying to discuss and analyze at length all topics that we have gleaned through the study of spiritual books, scriptures, contemplation on the material universe, and meditation on the spiritual universe. This particular video in this vlog is no exception to that rule. In fact, it is a mere continuation of all that we have been trying to do in all my previous videos. So kindly subscribe to this vlog and press the bell icon so that I may keep reminding you of all my previous, present, and future videos. So let us continue with the topic of discussion for today's video. By now, we all know that there is one very important term which is perennial in the psyche and life of every human living entity, whether male or female, in a lifetime in this material world. This particular term or element is known as mind, which is the main driving force behind the life of every human living entity. In fact, mind is present in all those living entities also which are not human but in varying degrees. Now, this mind is actually subtle in nature. We all know by now that when the individual raw, unevolved spirit soul gets in touch with this huge, gigantic, and very powerful material world, to avoid that irritation, this material world tries to wrap this spirit soul with four layers of material body. These four layers are known as causal body of intelligence and logic, astral body of feelings and emotions, etheric body of five senses, namely sight, hearing, smell, taste, and touch, and the gross body made up of four material elements, namely air, fire, water, and earth. The other three subtle bodies are made up of a very subtle element known as ether, which can neither be seen nor be felt nor understood by the gross body of a living entity. However, the fact remains that one must grudgingly admit that these three etheric bodies are the sole origins of all vibrations that guide this living entity's gross body's actions and reactions through a mass of tissue called brain, which is safely embedded in the cranium of each gross body. Now come two very important terms. One is called mind that we are going to analyze here, and the other is known as ego. The mind that we are going to talk is the repository of all vibrations that emanate out of the three subtle bodies, namely causal intelligence, astral mind, and etheric senses. Only when they reach this mind does this mind process them and transmit them to that mass of tissue called brain in the gross body of that particular living entity. Though the brain then processes a selection of vibrations thus transmitted to it by the mind and then percolates a particular juice extracted out of that selection of vibrations down the gross body of that particular living entity, whether male or female, and the actions and reactions of that particular living entity in this material world depend on that juice. However, here I would like to inform all that there is one particular catalyst that cements the soul with the causal body with the astral mind with the etheric senses, and the etheric senses with the gross body. This particular catalyst is known as ego. Ego in various degrees and types is present in the psyche of every human living entity, whether male or female. This particular ego is of three major categories. The first one is known as false ego. In false ego, that particular living entity to whom this false ego belongs and is active in identifies himself or herself with his or her layers of material body. That is the four layers of material body. In that case, this particular living entity, whether male or female, sincerely believes that he or she is an individual living entity who came in a particular lifetime and died after his or her tenure in this material world in that particular lifetime, and everything in his or her case is over for the time being. On the other hand, there is another type of ego which is called the real ego. In that process, the same living entity, whether male or female, is identifying himself or herself with this individual spirit soul and not with this material body. In such a case, this person acknowledges that initially he or she was just an individual spirit soul who got entangled in this material world and was surrounded or enveloped with four layers of material body, thus they are beginning a chain of unlimited births and deaths in this material world for that particular living entity in a life, in a particular process. These births may be in various species, including that of a human being. This particular living entity acknowledges that he or she is originally just a spirit soul which has now become a living entity, and because of its being in a process of infinite births and deaths, every lifetime of the same living entity marks only one birth and nothing else. There is also another category of ego. This category is known as superego. In this case, the living entity acknowledges his or her identity not as a series of bodies or the individual spirit soul, but just as a part and parcel of the super soul or the supreme personality of Godhead or the spiritual whole. This particular ego is present in all those exalted spiritualists who understand and acknowledge that they do not have any individual identity either as an individual spirit soul or as a living entity. They are only a part and parcel of this spirit whole. So these are three types of ego. Depending upon the psyche, destiny, karma, experience, knowledge, and maturity of every living entity, whether male or female, he or she accepts one particular type of ego in a lifetime. Sooner or later, it is quite possible that every living entity will one day acknowledge his or her identity as that spirit soul or a part part and parcel of that spirit whole. These things we must remember before proceeding further. The mind which we are trying to discuss in this video is the main instrument that generates energy and guides every living entity, male or female, in a lifetime in this material world. Now we must remember that this individual mind is present in every living human entity. The mind of every living human entity is different from the other mind of another living human entity. Hence, every living human entity behaves according to his or her mind and its vibrations transmitted to his or her brain. This mind is so important that without its working in the psyche and life of every particular human and living entity, that particular living entity drops his or her gross body and melts into the space along with the other three subtle elements and the mind of that particular living entity. This mind gets activated 9 months before a living entity is born in a particular lifetime, in a particular womb in this world. This living entity selects his or her womb to be born into only according to the vibrations of his or her subtle mind. In other words, this mind chooses the womb in which a particular living entity, whether male or female, will be born in. This all depends on that person's prarabdha karma. Prarabdha karma is a slice out of what is known as Sanchit karma. Every human living entity is going through a series of births and deaths in this material world. Of these, the other species and their birth do not have any destiny or karma attached to that living entity till he or she is born in other species like a cell, algae, amoeba, grass, weeds, creepers, plants, trees, worms, insects, reptiles, amphibians, birds, bees, animals, etc. In such a case, he or she does have only memories of that particular lifetime. This memory is safely ensconced in the psyche of that particular living entity. However, as soon as the same living entity graduates into being born in this human species, of which there are 400,000 categories, the destiny and karma of that particular living entity begins. In other words, the unworked karma of the first birth of that particular living entity in human form begins the destiny and karma of that particular living entity. This goes on and on through every lifetime of that particular living entity. In other words, we all are going through a series of births and deaths in human form, and we are all having a storage of unworked karma through our different lifetimes in our own psyche and superconscious memory in the subtle world or subtle bodies. This particular storage of unworked karma of various births is known as Sanchit karma. Depending upon the choice of that particular living entity, one slice of that Sanchit karma is used to be made into a foundation for birth in any particular lifetime. In other words, when one human living entity dies in a particular birth, he or she is left with a storage of this unworked karma called Sarkit karma, which is a storage of such karma that has become so big due to his or her several births. When the same living entity is poised to take another birth, a slice of that Sanchit karma is given to that living entity to be used by him or her as a foundation for his or her another birth and lifetime in this material world. Depending upon that prarabdha karma, he or she selects the required womb through which he or she should be born in a particular lifetime. Some are born poor, some middle class, some very rich, some royal, some normal, some ordinary, some educated, some uneducated, some affluent, some not so affluent, and so on. It depends on the womb of that particular lifetime according to this slice of unworked karma called prarabdha karma. This is the foundation for the birth in any lifetime. This living entity's life begins with that prarabdha karma. As he or she grows older, he or she slowly but steadily develops a free will. Free will is the opportunity given by destiny to every living entity to work according to his or her whims, fantasies, choices, etc., so that he or she may make additional karma. This free will may or may not be based on that foundation called prarabdha karma. One, thanks to this free will karma, this person adds new karma into his or her psyche. This is known as kriyamana karma. Of this kriyamana karma, some may be worked out in this particular lifetime itself, and some may remain in the residue portion of karma of that particular lifetime for that living entity. These are called agami karma, that is, unworked residue of karma of that particular lifetime. This agami karma is dependent on two karmas. One is the still unworked prarabdha karma of that lifetime, and the unworked karma of the kriyamana kind in this particular lifetime. These are joined together and pasted to the originally existing Sanchit karma for a reference in another birth. This goes on and on in this endless cycle of birth and death of every human living entity, whether male or female, in a particular case or chain of that particular living entity's destiny in this material world. Depending upon this person gets evolved, experienced, educated, matured, etc. And this is the endless journey of birth and death through which every living entity goes till one day he or she becomes spiritual in nature, tries to realize his or her true self, gets ultimately tired of this endless cycle of birth and death in this material world and wants liberation from that. After he or she gets liberation in this material world's endless birth and death, he or she, as a evolved, matured, experienced, and mellowed down spirit soul, gets ready to become delivered to the Supreme Personality of Godhead. This is all I wanted to talk in this particular video. Kindly let me know what you think of my talk on this particular matter. Please give me your own expert views, thoughts, ideas, and opinions so that I may blend everything together for the sake of this society. Before concluding, let me remind you that I am also a published author with Amazon Kindle and paperback. I write on spiritualism, fiction, and assorted subjects. Spiritualism happens to be my favorite subject. Till we meet in my next video, it is good morning from TSV Raghavan.